Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another session of our Talk with Mr. Lauyako. Mr. Lauyako started off with defining what foreign policy is, and we have talked about foreign policy from different angles. We're now focusing on foreign policy decision makers, actors who are very pivotal or important to our study of foreign policy. We talked about Sir Michael Somare, and for today's lecture, we will talk about another influential figure in our study of foreign policy history, and is called Sir Ebia Olewale. So before we go into our discussion for today, the Q&A session, I want to welcome all you viewers, those of you watching on Facebook, and those of you who have just joined us in the Zoom meeting room, and those who will be watching on YouTube. Welcome to our session. This is part of the unit called PNG or Foreign Policy in PNG, PG428, and it's offered by DWU University through the program or in the program Bachelor of Arts in PNG Studies and International Studies. So PNG and International Studies used to be called PNG Studies and International Relations, but we've changed the name to PNG and International Studies. So without further delay, I'll go straight into my first question to Mr. Ako, since it's a Q&A session. Mr. Ako, can you tell us a bit about Ebia Olewale? Who is he, and why is he important to our discussion on PNG's foreign policy?
Thank you, Mr. Egiora. Thank you, students. It's a nice Friday afternoon to sit down and talk about history. So I've come up with a PowerPoint on all the answers. So I'll just put the PowerPoint up and we go from there. Yes, so say Ebia Olewale, his first name was Niwia. He was born in 21 Feb 1940, and he passed on the 23rd of Jan 2009. He was a PNG statesman. Was born on the beach at Ture village in the Western District of the then territory of Papua New Guinea. The beach is mentioned by Jonathan Ritchie. I think before we continue, I'll just say that every information we have here is from Jonathan Ritchie's, Dr. Jonathan Ritchie's book on Ebia titled Ebia, A Life of Service, 2012. So he mentioned that the beach is the location where women from that village went to give birth. So as you can see, in the old days, there was a control and protocols on life. Okay, so Ebia trained to be a teacher at the Port Moresby Teachers College in 1957. But however, before that, his first education was at the hands of the men of his Ture village, who taught him all the important skills of gardening, fishing, sailing, navigating, and hunting both land and sea creatures. This was while attending the mission school there, where he was taught the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic by the LMS teachers. Just sidetracking a bit in terms of the LMS history, that is where the first LMS missionaries taught in Papua New Guinea. That's where they, even before they came to Hanover. Okay, so in 1954, we'll call him Niwia because that's how Dr. Ritchie called him, his first name. Niwia attended the Daru Village Higher School, Daru Village Higher School, run by the government with very minimal English. From the village school, he came to the school in the township. Then in October 1956, he passed the scholarship examination and was selected to attend the ensuing interview in Conedobo, Port Moresby. He easily passed the interview, but then was told that being 17, he was too old to enter grade 7 the following year, because all the grade 7 students then were 12-year-olds. So he was told to report to Sogeri Secondary School instead, Sogeri Senior High School, sorry. In 1957, he enrolled at the Sogeri Senior High School after some early mix-up. And then he was there for about 6 years. And at the end of 1963, he submitted his application to join the Territory's Public Service, listed his first choice as a teacher. So in January the following year, this is 1964, he was accepted to do the C course at the Port Moresby Teachers College. At the end of 1963, he graduated from the Port Moresby Teachers College and was posted to Daru High School, where he commenced teaching in 1966. But he only taught there for about 6 months before relocating to Port Moresby again and securing a job at Kila Kila High School to teach there. His life teaching is important because that is where he will start his political ambitions. So remember that, Daru, 6 months, and then went back to Port Moresby. Then in 1968, during the second House of Assembly elections, Ebia contested the South Fly seat and unseated the sitting member, Robert Tabua, to enter the House of Assembly, the second House of Assembly. You will notice that some of our one talks from the Western Province have surname of Tabua. The Tabua's name, the name Tabua comes from the Fijian missionaries who came there to teach. So Niwea had worked really hard and tirelessly to be elected by the voters of South Fly. Now, winning the seat was a culmination of a long journey that had taken him from Ture Ture to Daru to Sogeri and then to Port Moresby and to his burgeoning political career. So his life as a parliamentarian. Ebia began his parliamentary career in an imposing fashion, according to Dr. Ritchie. He did so by joining in the debates and participating in questions without motions. And he also started taking interest in international issues, such as those in West Irian and the latest reports of the UN Trusteeship Council on the timing of self-government. He was also a member of the Selected Committee on Constitutional Development, established in November 1969, to determine name, flag, anthem, the type of government we should have, and how to move towards self-government. All those small issues this Committee on Constitutional Development was set up to achieve. So the committee toured extensively domestically and internationally. Then during the 1972 elections, Ebia won a seat again. Then he was appointed Minister for Education. Later, he would be appointed as Minister for Commerce. And then in March 1975, he would become the Justice Minister. So his growing interest in foreign relations. In June 1972, he participated in a seminar at the University of Papua New Guinea. The seminar was intended to allow several ministers, including the chief minister, that would be semi-court, to express their views on what should be Papua New Guinea's foreign policy, despite responsibility for foreign relations continuing to rest with Australia until March 1975, only 6 months before independence. So Ebia described the links with Australia as pervasive and intricate, characterized by emotional bonds, mutual self-interest, and common habits of thought, as well as dependence, misunderstandings, tensions, rivalries. He emphasized that relations after independence should move on to newer bases of mutual self-respect. This rings a bell nowadays. The relationship with Indonesia, he considered, was overshadowed by the events in West Irian or West Papua. But he said that there would seem to be every reason to believe that with goodwill on both sides, the two governments will agree to approach the issues differently and patiently. He foresaw tremendous problems ahead with Papua New Guinea's trading links with other countries, with PNG at a disadvantaged compared to other developing post-colonial nations. He saw international trade linked to the more village-based economy of cash crops such as coffee. And even in 1972, when the country's mineral resource in Bougainville and in its own western district were beginning to become recognized, this was still not dominated by resource extractions. We are recounting his attendance at the seminar. So his concluding comments during the seminar was on the need for the country to forge its own identity. These were perceptive. He mentioned that the Papua New Guinea occupies a lonely place in the world affairs. We do not belong to a large natural grouping like the African countries that reached independence in the early 60s. Unlike many Asian countries, we are not big enough and do not have a long tradition of contact with other areas to have already established an independent identity. We are probably comparatively too big to be content as part of the South Pacific Island world, and we are likely to be too proud to remain tied to the apron strings of Australia. We shall therefore have to find an identity that is our own and that serves the dual purpose of gaining recognition for this country abroad and that makes our people conscious of their own nationality. So within a short period of time after setting out his thoughts on the foreign policy of his country in this fashion, Ebia found himself far too occupied with pressing priorities of his own department to devote to foreign relations or foreign affairs. He did manage to continue raising the issue of the border in the Torres Straits, provoking the ire of the Queensland Premier, someone by the name of John Biogi Pedersen, and ensuring that his voice, that ensured that his voice on foreign policy related matters continued to be heard, despite having a different portfolio in government. So in the years before independence, all responsibilities for foreign affairs policy making resided with the Department of the Administrator, which is the Australian Department of Administration. So by the middle of 1972, recruitment was already underway for suitable Papua New Guinean candidates for the diplomatic service. In the second half of 1973, Sir Albert Maurikiki was appointed Minister for Defense and Foreign Relations. And despite responsibilities for both these functions still being held by the Australian government. So PNG also had to decide on who its potential trading partners would be. So obviously the obvious choice of who the main trading partner would be obviously became Australia, who after independence would continue to be the most important aid donor. But relationships with other states in the region, including New Zealand, Indonesia, and Japan, were all considered significant. Papua New Guinea had strong ties with the states and dependent territories in the Pacific Ocean, as well as with the island nations of the Pacific, whom PNG felt that they had the greatest cultural affinity. Okay, so this was demonstrated both in the Torres Strait with Australia and in Bougainville, where the movement for secession was linked to the close cultural and ethnic ties felt between the peoples of Bougainville and the northwestern part of the British Solomon Islands protectorate then. A third border-related issue concerned the activities to the west of our country. So that's where Indonesian occupation of the western half of New Guinea and resistance from the Operation Papua America, or OPM, continued to create problems with illegal border crossing and refugees. You see, all of these three issues had already had long history of complexity and disagreement, which would continue throughout the ensuing decade following independence, and indeed right through now to the present. For instance, in Bougainville and the Torres Strait issue especially, what was at stake was Papua New Guinea's identity as a nation. If one part of the national territory could be hived off to join another country, there was the potential for other parts to choose their own political future as well. The case of Bougainville, of course, was compounded by the presence of the mine, an enormously important source of budgetary and export revenue. For these reasons, they remain close to the top of the list of the priorities that face the Papua New Guinean government. So there were also other priorities though, and during the years before independence, various attempts were made to establish links with the wider world. Papua New Guinea became the 35th member of the Commonwealth of Nations at independence. following a unanimous welcome at the Jamaica Conference in April 1975. And a little earlier, Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki visited China, which he said had the same objectives of self-reliance as Papua New Guinea. So I'm just trying to lay the background of where Sir Ebia's prominence would come in. So at independence, the PNG government had already established diplomatic relations with China, while formal links were made with other regional countries, including Japan, Indonesia, Fiji, New Zealand. There were also representations at the United States, the United Kingdom, and the UN. There was a strong connection felt with the United Kingdom in particular through the historical and contemporary Commonwealth ties. And the Queen had also been adopted as Papua New Guinea's head of state in the Constitution. See, friends to all, enemy to none, we know very well that that was our foreign policy intent from 1970 straight after independence. See, when Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki, in addressing the United Nations General Assembly in September 1976, defined this policy of universalism, he defined it as a balanced policy with which Papua New Guinea will make no enemies. However, it was not to be confused with non-alignment. He explained that universalism involved taking the middle path without moving to either side on questions relating to political ideologies, creeds, or governmental systems. He added that it does not mean just sitting on the fence. It is an active and positive policy, he added. So the exception was racism. The one area, he continued by saying that the one area in which Papua New Guinea government does not intend to pursue universalism is in respect for apartheid or the racialist policies of which are unacceptable to us, Papua New Guineans. So apart from this, the policy was one of even-handedness, even as Kiki remarked, recognizing both North and South Korea. The policy was written by the government leading into the 1977 elections, both in its friends to all aspect and in its approach to regional Pacific matters. So by 1977, the Bougainville issue had subsided, and at least as a foreign policy issue, but the nagging problem of the border across the Torres Strait with Australia remained to be resolved. The elections held in June 1977, and thus the first since independence, resulted in a Pangu-led coalition with the major partners again being the People's Progress Party, led by Sir Julius Chan, which also retained. Sir Julius also became the Deputy Prime Minister in that government, whose majority had been boosted and joined the post-independence glow. The United Party's support declined from 32 seats in 1972 to 27 during the election, and while Pangu's rose from 25 to 38, and the PPPs grew as well. There were some significant individual results also. The most pertinent for Ebia being that Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki lost his seat. He lost his contest to a lady by the name of Josephine Abijah. They were contesting a seat of Port Moresby. Sir Ebia himself won his seat again for the second time. So Ebia is the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. Okay, so with Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki gone, several other movements among his former ministry and the need to recognize both the increase in representation of the PPP and the 20 provinces. Chief Minister, Prime Minister Somare announced in August the new team of ministers. And that was when Ebia became the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. He became also the first Papua New Guinea member to criticize Australia over the Torres Strait border. And so apart from exhibiting his usual modesty concerning his own ability, what this meant for the direction of Papua New Guinea foreign policy under Ebia's stewardship was still yet to be defined. So the same issues that were before Sir Albert Mauri-Kiki continued for Ebia as foreign minister. Although by this time, the problem of Bougainville had abated a bit and had abated a bit as a foreign policy matter. The border with Indonesia to the west was more of a consent to the parts of the government which dealt with the internal affairs. So naturally, with Indonesia's incursion into the East Timor, the border remained important in terms of how relationship between the two countries developed. I mean, and that's what happens when countries share land borders. So a significant matter that had been subject of much work prior to his taking over from Kiki culminated with Papua New Guinea's access into the Lome Convention between the countries of the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific nations, and those of the European. It was then called the European Economic Community. This allowed for duty-free entry of many of Papua New Guinean exports into Europe. Other agreements that were established and ratified during that time were agreements such as those with the government of Norway on hydroelectricity, with the US on overseas private insurance, and ratification of agreements on broadcasting and agriculture. Those were some of the headways which were done by under the stewardship of the new foreign minister. The most important thing of a new country is determining its borders. Okay, so Ebia's own understanding of the border issue had been learned through personal experiences of sailing the Straits waters, fishing and hunting for dugong. His father and many others of the men still living in Ture Ture and the other village of Kunini back in Western Province had worked on the mother of pearl, trocus, and bedsteamer boats that had plied the strait since the 19th century. So even before that, the foundation myth of his people were intricately caught up in the shifting sands, currents, and islands that lay between Papua and the northern tip of Australia. Ebia, as the foreign minister, was the most knowledgeable member of the government to finally negotiate the border across the straits with Australia. He was the best person, right person for that job. So he had already demonstrated a knack of compromise and a consensual approach to negotiation. But again, the question was, would this be sufficient to achieve a satisfactory result for his people? As Ebia had pointed out as a young member of the House of Assembly in 1971, the border between Australia and Papua was established to Papua's disadvantage and without the realization of approval of any Papuan person, and legally excluded many Papuan people from their traditional fishing grounds. The border which he was referring to in 1971 encompassed not only the Torres Strait itself, it covered the 150 kilometers from Cape York in Australia to the southernmost part of Papua, 12 kilometers to the west of Mabudawan village, but also more than 200 islands, with a population estimated to be 5,000 during that time. The closest island to the Papuan mainland, Kusa, was no further than a kilometer at high tide, and the nearest inhabited island, Boigu, was around 5 kilometers. So there were around 700 people living on Boigu and the other inhabited islands close to Papua, Saibai and Dawan. On maps, the border appeared to kiss the coast, leaving little, if any, access to the sea for the inhabitants of Ture Ture, Masingara, Mabudawan, or any of the other coastal villages on the Papuan side, although in practice movements into the strait was relatively unhindered. The matter of the border, and importantly, traditional access and usage rights to the strait's marine resources, was one close to the heart of many of the people of Ebia's territory. Ebia recalled with sustained outrage the time when he and his family were denied landing when they traveled to test the island in 1958. The border issue stayed with him, both as a member of the House from 1968 to 72, and later as a minister, when he regularly raised the matter in Parliament and in public comments. So it was also a matter of to which governments on both sides of the straits, that is Papua New Guinea and Australia, devoted much attention as PNG moved from dependent territory status to full independence after 1975. In 1974, Seabed Marukiki wrote to his counterpart in the Australian government, seeking agreement to the concept of a single border with the islands between it and the Papuan coast, including Boigu, Saibai, and Dawan. Retaining the Australian identity as enclave, but access to the marine resources being kept open for Papuans as well. The government of Queensland, under whose jurisdiction the Torres Strait fell, was intransigent. And with other matters pressing in the lead up to independence, there had been little progress made on border negotiations until after the Australian government changed in late 1975. So the fact that the inhabitants of the Torres Strait Islands steadfastly rejected any possible alteration in sovereignty, meaning that they refused to be part of Papua New Guinea, this did not help the negotiations. Okay, so nevertheless, while slow progress continued to be made, as one by one agreements were reached on the many issues with the involvement of members, the Australian Papua New Guinea Public Service, of the members of the Australian Papua New Guinea Public Service. So Ebia's arrival on the scene late in 1977 as foreign minister, with his detailed knowledge of the region and the wishes of the people who lived in it, helped the negotiations to come to a resolution, and the treaty was agreed to at the end of 1978. It was clear that the people of the Papuan coast were more concerned over traditional rights of access to the marine and seabed resources, while the inhabitants of the islands had shown their commitment to remain within Australia. So this allowed the compromise that eventually was embodied in the treaty, where multiple boundaries were established to govern the seabed and fisheries, as well as the islands, with the intention of satisfying all parties compromising. So in making the agreement was done on at Daru on the 2nd of November 1978. Both Ebia and his Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs counterpart, Andrew Peacock, described it as reconciling on a permanent and equitable basis the claims of people and governments with justice for all concerned. This was an assessment which the post-Korea agreed to do run later. It is true that the other border issue, the boundary that bisected the island of New Guinea and demarcated the newly independent state of Papua New Guinea from the Melanesians who were part of Indonesia, was arguably of a more concern to the PNG government. After all, Indonesia had already demonstrated its willingness to use military aggression in West Irian in the 1960s and in East Timor in 1975, whereas this was hardly likely in the Torres Strait issue. Also, the complex matter of Bougainville had not been successfully resolved, as events in the following decades were to demonstrate. But the successful resolution of the lengthy and complicated disagreement over the Torres Strait was a remarkable achievement for all concerned, and in particular for Ebia. So his success was the culmination of the years of hard work, frustration, disappointment that many Papua New Guinean and Australian public servants alike, as well as politicians on both sides, had experienced. But he was able to bring his own knowledge and abilities to the exercise, and in doing so, achieved a breakthrough. Ebia's success in the Torres Strait negotiations and the more or less concurrent rearrangement of the ministry led to his promotion as the Deputy Prime Minister. So at the age of 38, already an experienced traveler, before taking on the Foreign Affairs portfolio in 1977, he attended the meeting of the Commonwealth Heads of Government in Sydney. In early 1978, he was in Rome for an ACP-EEC meeting, and then London to discuss a range of matters with the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as well as on trade issues, before he visited China. He was in many ways a polished politician with maturity, gained from a decade of experience in Parliament and in promoting the initiatives that he regarded as worthwhile for Papua New Guinea's interest. So moving on from universalism. In February 1979, government started working on the review of the foreign policy. So the review, Professor Edward Wolfers was appointed to lead the review, and he was to prepare a study of the problems and achievements of the past 3 years and outline contingencies to which PNG would might in the future deal with. I mean, look at 1975, the foreign policy was initiated, and then 3 years later, we went on a review. And from 1982, although we've had a couple of reviews and no white paper until I don't know, 20 or so years, and it boggles the mind now why it took that long. So there was an outcry when Professor Wolfers was appointed. There was an outcry because he was an Australian, but then the government ensured that he maintained that job, and Ebia had also stipulated that the views of a wide range of sectors from across Papua New Guinea, you see, they went across Papua New Guinea getting the views of everyone. And the foreign minister ensured that that happened. So the team in the first half of 1978, a robust debate grew over the merits of universalism and its alternatives. You had people like Sayam Bakayoko, Chief Somare, Renagi Lohia, and also Vincent Airy, all joined in the public discussions. And there were several contributions in the newspapers as well. These comments were all fed into the review, and it was Professor Wolf's task to consolidate all the recommendations. And these recommendations were expressed in a foreign policy white paper, which, as expected, encompassed a shift away from the universalism towards an approach described as active and selective engagement. Although this was late news, however, as by the time the white paper was submitted, the government had long moved away from attempting to be friends with all the nations. So the move was most obvious in Ebia's and his government's approach towards the continuing exercise of decolonization in the Pacific. And although PNG already had a policy of seeking rapid decolonization of the remaining colonial territories in the Pacific, Ebia went further by signaling his intentions to launch a joint move for decolonization with the other Pacific islands. So this is Ebia, the elder statesman. So at the end of the decade, Ebia's position not only in Papua New Guinea, but also in the region and international public life, appeared to be very much at its zenith. He was already a deputy prime minister, a trusted and respected leader whose knowledge of affairs concerning his own portfolio of foreign affairs and also of issues affecting the whole of Papua New Guinea was wide and profound. Internationally, his name was known in the corridors of government around the world, especially in London, in Paris, in New York, in Canberra. And for many in the Pacific, he was seen as a champion of their rights to self-determination. Now, in January 1980, Prime Minister Somare reshuffled his ministry. Ebia's position of Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs were hotly sought after leading up to the reshuffle, and Momis and Sejong Kaputin had aspirations in this regard. Ebia lost his Foreign Affairs portfolio to Tony Ila, formerly the Labour Minister and a Pangu Party member from Leyte. He was then given the Agriculture Ministry. He was later replaced as Deputy Prime Minister by Sayam Bakayoko, and Noel Levy took over the Foreign Affairs portfolio following Tony Ila. The picture caption you see here is of Ebia right there, and second from left, the late Mr. Jack Piddick, myself in the middle, and Ambassador Rai and Madam Rai. This was during a dinner hosted by Ambassador Rai at his residence in 2006 when this delegation visited. I think this was on the occasion of the commemoration of the 30th bilateral relations anniversary of bilateral relations between PNG and China. So I did have the opportunity of meeting this great man. Now, some points of interest about Ebia. He was already an activist for social and economic empowerment for his people from the time he left Daru to the Sogeri and then the Teachers College. During that time, he met up with emerging leaders of the 1960s at Sogeri, and later on in his work life, and also, which only added on to the political zeal he had. He was part of the Bully Beef Club, and I think he was at the right place at the right moment in the lead up to independence. And I mentioned about his schooling, his teaching engagement. See, he started campaigning 4 years before the 1968 House of Assembly elections. So when he finished his teachers college and was posted to Daru, he started telling everyone of his intentions. And he never wasted those opportunities because he when he returned back to teach at Kila after from Daru, any people from his electorate who visited, he would host them. He would wine and dine them. Professor Ritchie, Dr. Ritchie says that he brought them out to the Port Moresby clubs, which were open to locals, and bought them beers and fed them. Now, his time as ministers for education, commerce, and then justice, I think laid the foundation for that. If you get a hold of Jonathan Ritchie's book, you could say that some assume it was a demotion on the ministry's portfolios, but I myself see it as laying the platform or laying the groundwork for his eventual ascendancy to the foreign minister's role, and also the work on the foreign policy review. He's my Ms. Leguera, I'll go straight to the other question of the second question.
Yeah, please. The second question is in regards to some of the interesting points in Jonathan Ritchie's book.
Oh, okay. No, I just answered the second question, but I was gonna just go back to the first question on why is he important to our discussing on PNG foreign policy. It's two things: the border Torres Strait Treaty and foreign policy review. All the other engagements he had internationally are part of the role. So, I mean, they were important, but they were not significant from our modern point of view, looking back at his achievements. So, my own from my own understanding, I think that his importance to our foreign policy, to PNG's foreign policy discussion, is how he negotiated the Torres Strait Treaty. And this comes to the fact that Prime Minister Somare had the wisdom to say that you are the right person for the right job. You are from there. Go and negotiate on our behalf. And then the review came up, which we will do in the next lecture next week. But the review was part of his role too. But it fell upon him to carry the foreign policy review out. And as we go back to the his engagement at the UPNG seminar, where he mentioned that this was how it was supposed to be. And we will also note that during the time there was a comment by John Momis saying that they were like the PNG in the lead up to PNG in the lead up to 1 year before independence, and in the implementation of the Friends to All Enemy to None foreign policy. John Momis, Father Momis said that Papua New Guinea was like, he used the example of like Moses, bringing the Israelites out of Egypt and walking around aimlessly in search of a direction. But I won't go with this. I won't go with this example, because the Israelites came out with a vision, and that was the Promised Land. So maybe his definition is from the circumstances he was living in then, but I wouldn't use that definition, because when you look at the Israelites, and if you find the book of there's a book on strategic management written about Joshua. They talks about strategic management, and it talks about the visions and missions, and when they looked at the Israelites coming out of Egypt, it was one of the to me it remains one of the biggest strategic management exercises. Okay, so we're digressing a bit now, but when you look at have you ever imagined how you look at the size of Egypt, and the Israelites were living all over Egypt? How did the word go out for everyone to congregate at one spot? And how did they all congregated into their tribes, and how did they move out? That's one of the biggest questions. If when you look at strategic management, you will realize it was done by strategic thinkers. So your opinion is as good as mine. Who the strategic thinkers of the Exodus were? Maybe Moses was the visionary. They had a vision, and the people below him, in terms of Aaron or Joshua and all the other heads of the 12 tribes. Your opinion is as good as mine. But I thought it's when we have the opportunity to study strategic management, it will be a good case study to have a look at how they all came out together as one. Okay. So these are the main points of interest I got from Jonathan Rich's book. Yes, he led. He was part of some printing, the printing of pamphlets and also stuff on socioeconomic issues. He was also part of the pay consents of the pay gradings for teachers. He did all those, but when you look back, when you look at his story and then coming back up to now, we will see that his time as ministers of education, justice, and commerce laid the platform for him. Because when you look at education, education is about socioeconomics. When you look at justice, it's about socioeconomics. And when you look at commerce, it's about trade. And then when he became the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, or Minister for Foreign Affairs, it was a combination of all those that was helping him to move forward. And the fact that he was a local from Western Province, and he had experience being turned back from Test Island with his family when they went out to visit family on the other side of the border. Those were great, good examples which gave him the substance to sit, or like in our terms now, which gave him the substance to write good talking points for his bilateral meetings with his Australian counterpart. Now that's the reference on Mr. Rich's book. I will, if you don't have a copy, I will try to get in touch with him and ask him if he can send us an e-copy. Mr. Egger, I'll continue on to your last question.
Before we go to the last question,
Go ahead.
I have a quick question. From your opinion, what do you think about the Torres Strait Treaty? There's quite a lot of things being said, and over the years, there's no proper, thorough review of the treaty itself, and also the issues that are affecting those situated around the border area. So, from your own opinion, what do you think about the treaty itself? Should we review it? Should there be some other things that we need to add in or remove? Like from your experience as a former Foreign Service officer and someone who's worked with the department. Sorry, Mr. Ako, you're on mute.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
From my experience, it has to be reviewed because right now it is not only about trade. It is about the migratory nature of the fishery. I was talking with sorry, can I stop the share now?
Yes, please.
Okay. I was talking with some of the fisheries officers a while back, and they said apart from the tuna's migratory habits, lobster or crayfish. You ever wondered why there's a lot of crayfish and lobster at the Yule Island? I asked him that, and he said, yes, you ever wonder why there's a lot of crayfish and lobster at the Yule Island? It's because the lobsters, all these little lobster or crayfish, they are born in the, well, I'll put a layman's language. We don't know the fishery terminology, but they are born in the Torres Strait or around the northern north part of Australia, around the Barrier Reef. and then they slowly make their way up to the Ule Island to die. So when we take all those factors into consideration and the food security issues and all that, it's going to become an interesting negotiation engagement if we decide to bring those. We have to have hard facts, scientific. You see, this is where the academics come into play in terms of foreign policy. You're not going to get practitioners to go and research those how lobster or coral or anilocene, the currents, the academics are there to do it for the country. So, that's what the fisheries people told me. They all congregated in the Islands to die. So same lobster crossing borders. How do we safeguard it? So they must be. I think that every treaty must be reviewed periodically, maybe every 5 to 10 years, because we are talking about the change in geopolitics. How can you change a foreign policy and because of geopolitics and you continue to maintain the existing treaties? They must be reviewed too. So I'm in full support of your comments that all the treaties must be reviewed. Even reviewed and say that no, or something stop saying that's okay, but the review date must be there. It was looked at and it was said, let's go on for the next 5 years again. See, we are now at a very, very important juncture of PNGs for international relations. By next year, on the 50th anniversary, we will have a foreign policy with its white paper. And then during the implementation part, I'm by headache the lawyer now because you want to implement something. No, we have to review this treaty. The treaty says review time is that time, but there's nothing on review. Then the bilateral engagement pushes into play now. A diplomatic note or a foreign minister visits the other country and says that during the talking points, we want to have a review of this. Then it goes down to the technical level where officers are now told to review stuff. And then depending on where the partners' interests are, either delay or fast track Bakama.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ako. Yeah, I mean, apart from fisheries, you also have, we love the NRL. We talk about NRL teams and rugby league in general, and we use rugby league as an analogy to explain foreign policy. So if you look at some of the players, the superstars, the hottest talents now in rugby league, for example, Amiso Tabwa Fido is from Sabah Island. And Sabah, you can stand on the coastline of Sabah. I've not been there, but just from pictures, you can stand on the coastline and you see Daru, you see the coastline of PNG. So we all know that it's, if you go back to, in reference to the UN law of the seas, the UNCLOS, Sabah and Boigu is where Jane Gagai comes from, and many of the other, Ezra Mam is from the Torres Strait as well. So all of these talented athletes, if we renegotiate, maybe we can say, okay, maybe we can say that they're eligible to play for PNG based on the UN law of the seas, because some of these islands are within the territorial seas of PNG, and it's by law part of Papua New Guinea. So that's something that we can, apart from fisheries and other marine resources, the oil or other minerals that are underneath the Torres Strait or the sea. So that's something that can feature in our conversation as we go along, talking about the border issue itself. Any questions or comments from the students before we move in?
Talking about the Torres Strait Islanders, if one of you did watch, if any of you did watch Mal Meninga's program on Sunday and Monday, yeah, about him going back to his roots. And he did mention the fact that if an indigenous wants to play for his country, he welcomes it, because every time the indigenous players go out and play for their respective countries, they bring the standard up. It was an interesting point when he said it, because he will, we can now know that Mal Meninga wants the growth of rugby league to happen, but you can't. And he knows that rugby league cannot grow if all the best players are wearing the green and gold. That's why he was happy when all the Samoans went to play for their country, all the Tongans went to play for, but it increases the level. And if we bring that idea back to like what Mr. Giro was saying, these are things which our policymakers must consider. These are not conversations that can be heard around only the TV during the NRL time. These are huge policy matters, and I do not know whether our policymakers are aware of this, or it again comes down to your interest in sports. Suppose you know a play sport now you are in charge of policy now, interest of sport. Oh mate, I don't know how you're gonna go and talk about sports matters if you had never touched a rugby ball in your life or a netball ball in your life. And I mean it with all respect to everyone, because those are team sports, and team sports mean bringing a different group of people into one cluster and moving forward. And if we had never experienced those, how it affects our engagement in a team. It can make people work as loners, and it can affect the student mentor process. And you look at say Ebia's journey, everyone says humble beginnings, but his was a true humble beginning. And I had mentioned complications with his entry into Sogeri the first time, because during the first time, Ono put him name blame. So from Mosby, he got on the car and he went all the way up, and they said that he am not got name. So he had to use his contact back at Daru High School to revisit that thing again, and eventually they put his name on, and he went up and he went to school. And then you look at the man and the drive he had, and because he was an educationist. If it was someone else, or if it was me, I would have given up and gone back to the village. And then we wouldn't know who will negotiate the Torres Strait Treaty. A non-Western province person, because the person who could have negotiated them give up and go back to the place, because first time you play Simon Kamlo Mosby, you forgot to put his name on the Sogeri list. But no, his drive was there, so he went back, did his own thing through his connections, and they got his name on, and he went back and he went to school, and like they say, the rest is history. That's an important aspect of his life, I think. If he had just given up and gone back home because his name was not there, we don't know about the Torres Strait Treaty. We have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ako. I think Samantha has a question. Samantha.
Go, Samantha.
What I think, but she has a question. Samantha, you can go ahead with your question. So alternatively, I can just read the question. I think the question is shared in the chat function. Samantha is asking, was the Torres Strait Treaty ever reviewed? Was it ever reviewed?
I'm not sure. I'm just writing. I'll answer it. I was writing it. I'm not sure about that, because but there are regular bilateral engagements between officials and ministers. They have the regular border committees and something, but the treaty as a whole, whether it was reviewed or not, I'm not sure. I'll find out in the next readings when we talk about it.
Yeah, I think
and also, sorry, Mr.
liaison.
Egger. Oh yeah, the BLM and those meetings. Yeah. No, I was going to go on the investment thing on Tuesday. I did ask Mr. Hood, and he said that he told me that from that attachment, the IP in the investment promotion after 1975 came up on how to move towards investment promotion. That's what Mr. Hood said. And he was very happy that it was brought up, because he wanted to go back and tell his officers also on the genesis of the organization they're working in. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, from what I know from some sources, that there's yet to be a major review of the treaty itself, but there are yearly, biannual, I think annual or biannual meetings with Australian officers from the Fed and other government agencies. They have the annual meetings. I think the last one they brought some of those indigenous Torres Strait Islanders up to Port Moresby and the indigenous leaders Port Moresby, and they had a meeting on border issues. Yeah, so it's an ongoing, but there needs to be a major review in line with the changes that has happened since the treaty was first signed or ratified.
Just in adding to your comment, we go back to the interests of the Torres Strait Islanders. You know, some of them might not want to muddy the water because they are enjoying all the perks and privileges of the Australian good services, government services. You know, I have a very good friend who used to stay there, and you know, they have hospitals and schools systems there, and they have most of them are now most of their businesses are run on what they call social enterprises. So they have social enterprises where you where the profits are directed into some particular engagements. So some of their social enterprises would be profits from those profits from those businesses are directed into supporting or subsidizing school fee for Torres Strait Islanders to go all the way to universities. So unless we can provide all those things on our side, that traditional intentions of staying on the other side of the border will continue to remain, regardless of our best intentions.
Do you think, Mr. Aqua, the issue itself has some correlation with the South China Sea issue? The territorial dispute between the Philippines and the other countries with China and the 9-dash line. And it's becoming an hot topic now if you look at maritime security. So do you think the Torres Strait Island Treaty, and if PNG in the future, if we have a hardliner as a PM and he wants to enforce UNCLOS because we are a signatory, then will it cause tension and conflict between us, PNG, and Australia?
With the South China Sea, it's contested by more than 3 countries, I think. I'm using the number 3 because if we were to start using UNCLOS to look at the Torres Strait Islands, we have to consider the Indonesian side too. That side too. So it will be a 3-way engagement, which is why we were talking about the immediate foreign policy intent must cover our immediate neighbors first. And that is a very, very hot topic that can turn into something different, turn to something different in the event one of our hardline leaders says that we want to redraw the lines because now we want to bring in a couple of economies to build things on the shoreline. So that can say the writings are on the wall. Writings on the wall is happening, and I am not aware of what's happening behind the scene, but I am pretty sure there's a lot happening behind the scene to ensure that this mustn't happen or this must happen. There's push and shove happening, and in the in between, we are still working on a game plan to give us directions. And as soon as that direction is given, the implementing aspect is the biggest challenge of all, because we have a direction. We will have a direction, but depending on the push and shove in geopolitics, will the direction be implemented? And a couple of weeks ago, I talked with the Asia Pacific AP4D on economic statecraft, and they talked about carrots and sticks. Carrots, economic statecraft is quickly is about a donor country providing economic development. Now, carrots will be things like through development cooperation, through scholarships, through, sticks will be embargoes and, banning or something or similar. So when we start looking at carrots and sticks, that will be the challenge, the implementation time. Whether we accept the carrot or because they or we enforce sticks ourselves. We have those are big challenges which we must talk about, and in our sessions going forward, I would like to include all those stuff in all those foreign policy related stuff, so everyone is aware of what's happening around us, and we'll share ideas here. Sharing ideas is important for our engagements. Like I said, going back to the IPA thing, the MD was really over the moon that there was a group of there was a class at the university talking about investment. So we'll continue to share all those ideas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ako. I'll wind up with the last question. The question basically wants to just get your views on how the PNG Dictionary of Biography project by ANU is connected to our study of important political leaders and their influence on foreign policy or foreign policy history. And
We forgot all about that. We forgot all about the third question. Yeah, the dictionary of biography is a project run by the ANU, but they're looking at writing about people who were supposed to be mentioned but time forgot. That's how I'm putting it myself. So those who have not had been written about. Okay, so that's the project going on at the moment, and I am part of that group workshop project, and we meet in about 2 weeks' time to look at how far each of us have gone in writing about people. So, for instance, I've written about 2 persons who I think should deserve mention, but are not being mentioned. One is Ambassador Peter Ilaw, who was the first ever maritime naval officer to command PNGDF. And he broke tradition because PNGDF is a land-based organization. And he broke tradition by becoming his commander. And the other one is my own father, my late father, who was one of 4 army chaplains to take over from the departing Australian chaplains in 1975. The others will be writing about other stuff, and we would know who people are writing about in a couple of weeks' time. And I did noted it down that I'm sure that there are people who are still looking for people to write about. And I will suggest if one of them is looking for anyone, I would suggest that they would write about, say, Ebia also. It's a dictionary of biography, so the word number is between 800 and 1,500. But so it really forces the biographer to pin down into one particular topic of that person. So it's really hard. It's really difficult to go about writing those. You keep on cutting, and you're left with 3 pages, and the 3 pages looks like a passport particulars, date of birth, it's all the stuff. But yes, that's still happening. It was a project from the 1990s, but due to funding or putting goal aside. But now that this project is coming on, during the ANU presentation, I was led to believe that this is part of Australia's part of the 50th anniversary celebration birthday presents to support that. So that these are the substantial birthday presents we want. This is written by done for written by Papua New Guineans. Then it was very interesting, very interesting to note that our national archives are still non-paperless. They the records are kept very ordinarily. So it gives us ideas of how to go about keeping records. So big challenge. Mr. Aguirre, one more question here on the treaty.
Yeah, there's a question from Adele. She's asking, do you think the treaty was taken into account when the US PNG defense agreement was made?
I wouldn't know about the particulars of the negotiation, but because it was in a US thing, I am assuming that the US held separate bilaterals with the Australians on the side before they came to talk with the Papua New Guineans. And if we had done the same thing too, there would have been loggerheads. Or we would have balanced up something. But I'm thinking that to play a total close side, now carrying on proposition come. Because how it went through was it went through very quickly or smoothly. So assuming that everything was smoothly done and signed off. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Ko. There's another question from Waterhouse. Waterhouse is asking, in comparison to Ebia's contribution to PNG foreign and trade relations, what do you think is the ideal criteria for a politician in the ministerial portfolio of foreign affairs should be? Do you think appointing a foreign minister is done on merit? What are your thoughts on this?
We all know very well that the appointment of ministries are done by numbers. So depending on the numbers and depending on your numbers, you can have your wish list also. That I'll leave it there. All of us have our own preferences of who this minister is. You know, because he was a soldier, he should be defense minister. Because he used to play rugby league, he must be sports minister. But in real life, it doesn't work that way. We know that the numbers talk, and so long as you bring in the numbers to form the government, then you have the advantage of putting together a wish list and then negotiating it for others for yours. The onus falls on the bureaucrat. The onus falls on the bureaucrat. That's the reason why, going back to the talk on the foreign policy, you see, with the launching, or let's say with the launching of our new foreign policy next year, we can only hope that it is locked up in a net or included in the constitution. It's included in the constitution so that whoever the minister is bound by law to follow one pathway. Now, when these are not when the foreign policy is not tied up in the constitution, then it depends on the intentions of the minister. If the minister is pro this, they'll move that way. If the minister is anti this, then they'll move that way, regardless of the interest of the country. Now, the foreign policy has taken into the interest of the country, taken into the interest of the country. So the interest of the country is enshrined in the constitution. And I think only certain number of countries have their foreign policy enshrined in the constitution. That's the reason why I also go to war. Talking about the border, if the border is disputed, they go to war because the law says go fight for it. When they sit in international conferences, they will say no and name stone to lape, all by passing mouse and stuff. Why? Because the law supports them. No one's going to be wrong because they're following the law. For us, because it's not enshrined in the constitution, it now depends on the delegation leader or use him instinct blame. And then you will realize that most countries know of our interest in rugby league. So you have to be very, very switched on when they come talking about that that match and how this guy was running all over the place. And then while you are nodding, they quickly throw in the question and you're nodding too. So we have to be alert with those type of things. So it's a good thing, we're going to have a foreign policy. There could be a foreign policy act. If that goes in, or they put the foreign policy into the constitution, and it's enshrined by law, so everyone just follow it. Now, the only thing that mentions international relations in the constitution is section 117 on treaties. So we can add on to continue, use that as the baseline to add in our foreign policy initiatives. It might be an idea. Although at all, but
Thank you, Mr. Ako. I read that Ganjiki Wayne is going to develop the foreign policy or foreign affairs bill or foreign service act. So I hope if he's watching, then he can incorporate that into or make amendments to the constitution as well. So
great. That's great news.
No.
Good news.
So we'll try to get that across to Ganjiki. I think he's in the process of putting together the foreign affairs bill. So hopefully he can somehow make amendments to the constitution to include that. So we are bound by law to make sure that our foreign policy is reviewed and it's up to date, and we make decisions based on that. Okay, Olga, thank you. Through meeting Taso, Olga, something we got lo tok na sharing. And we thank Mr. Ako once again for his time, and as well all you viewers on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you've gained something from what we are doing now, our discussion so far. We'll continue on next week when we look at our foreign policy review in 1979, and for the Q&A session, we'll talk about Chen, the veteran. Sir Julius Chen is still alive, he's still in politics, and still serving the country public service. So we've not talked about people like, say, Albert Maurikiki, say, Yambake Okok. All these men are really, great people in our history. Joseph Nombri was instrumental, part of the Blue Beef Club, even though he didn't rise up to the political level to represent Simbu or PNG at the political stage. He was very influential at the bureaucratic level as well, and a statesman representing PNG in Japan and other parts of the country. So these are all people that we have not talked about, respectable giants, like I referred to earlier. And we thank Mr. Ako for helping us to dissect, look into the political history, zoom out individuals, and talk about their achievements. So we keep knowledge about them alive, and we pass it on to the next generation of you leaders, you future foreign policy makers, so you can continue to read books like the one written by Jonathan Ritchie and Sana and all these other important biography or books that contain biographical details about our leaders of the past. So thank you, Mr. Ako, once again. Have a pleasant Friday afternoon. We thank you for your time. We'll meet again next Tuesday. Hopefully it's not a public holiday. And next Friday as well. PNG, the land of many public holidays.
All right, everyone. Have a good weekend. Study strong. Bye.
One kind. Bye for now. Thank you, everyone.